Okay, thank you, everybody. We're ready to start, please. Can I welcome you to the John Meikle Room for our Somerset Board meeting in November. Before we proceed, can those of you who are online just confirm you can hear me okay? They're waving at me. This is really good news. Okay, so my name is Councillor Bill Revens. I'm chair of the Somerset Board, and could colleagues please note that we've extended the meeting time for 3 hours to ensure that we don't miss out on any of the excitement that we have ahead of ourselves. And I'll try and keep us to schedule on this one. I know we've struggled slightly in the past. So the agenda pack and the papers are available via ModGov or directly from the Somerset Council website from the link that would have been sent out to members, and you can find that on our council website. So in line with recommended meeting procedures, please can I request that all members and officers turn off all microphones and if you're online videos, but please remember to turn on microphones and videos when you speak. This helps with background noise, call quality and anything disrupting the meeting. I believe the video is showing me, so is it focusing on speakers today?
It wasn't. Chair.
Okay, so I was told that the video facility in the room was only focusing on the general room view, but it seems to have actually zoomed in on me. So we'll see whether it works today or not. It seems to have developed a life of its own. So when I invite someone to speak, could you just clearly state your name for the benefit of anybody who maybe cannot see who is speaking, so that we have some clarity? And can I also remind board members not to use the chat function for anything other than committee business, otherwise it's distracting. I prefer those people online to use the hands up function if they could please. Also, warm welcome to any members of the public and media who are joining us today. And finally, as agendas are viewed electronically, could you kindly refer directly to a page number so that we can find it more easily on the electronic papers we have in front of us. And just in respect to the housekeeping, there is no expected fire alarm, and should this happen, please follow our Democratic Services colleagues and they will lead the way out to the car park at the rear of the building. So with no further ado, Mr. Jamie Jackson, please can you tell us our apologies for absence today?
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Board. We've received apologies from Paul von der Heide, Catherine Nolan, Peter Lewis, Angela Kerr, Ewan Jones and Burj Balian. And the following board members are online, Chair, which is Michelle Allen, Hilary Robinson, Lisa Simpson, David McClay, Rachel Perry, Sarah James and Steve Taylor.
Thank you very much. Which moves us on to declarations of interest. Oh, sorry, Councillor Lyshon.
Further apology, Chair, from Councillor Heather Shearer. And just to make clear that Councillor Lucy Trimnell has been replaced on this board by Councillor Dawn Denton. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lyshon. And we've got Steve Taylor online.
Yeah, just to say, Chair, I haven't sent my apologies. I'm here.
Duncan?
And I'd just like to apologise. Unfortunately, I've got a clash, so I will have to leave before the end of the meeting. Apologies for that.
Okay, and Hilary?
Thank you. Just to say that I'm here too on Teams.
And Lisa?
Thank you. I've also got a clash with apologies. I'll need to leave at 11:15.
Okay, thank you. Not seeing any further apologies. Thank you very much. And can we now go to the minutes of the previous meeting, which was on the 23rd of July. Are we happy that those are a true record of that meeting? I'm seeing general assent in the room and no hands online. We'll take that as being read. Public question time. I believe there's no public questions submitted, which brings us on, and we've now caught up on schedule, the system working adopting a human learning systems approach, and I'm inviting Lou Woolaway to present, please.
Tells me I'm not in a meeting, but I am in a meeting. So just a moment, and it should come up. I had it all ready as well. So let's see. Coming. There we go. There we go. I have to caveat this with I am not an expert in human learning systems, but I know a bit more following the workshop, and so I'm here really to ask of the board that we support this approach going forward, and we will bring in experts who know far more about it than myself. But for those of you who were able to join the September workshop, we had a presentation from Gary, who is part of the Health Determinants Research collaboration from Plymouth, and they have adopted a human learning systems approach to the work that they have done down in Plymouth, and they shared it with us as part of the workshop, and it was met with real enthusiasm about approach to really try and navigate complex systems, which our integrated care system certainly is, even though we're a single footprint. I don't think any system is ever considered simple. So it's a way of trying to navigate our way through a systems approach to the work that we would want the board to drive forward. So I'll just do a little bit of a recap. So really it's about looking at the human strengths and needs, and it's looking at the people we are trying to provide services for or to support, but looking at it from a very empathetic viewpoint and trust people to make their own decision making. So if you've ever done community development, it's kind of that approach, but at an individual level. You know, you don't go in to do community development and tell people what they need to happen. You work with them to try and understand the need and then work through what the best option might be to be able to support that work. We do this work, so we're not starting from scratch, but it's kind of that learning mechanism to this work that's really important. Could we build a learning infrastructure within our local system by which we can share and work through the learning as we develop projects and programs to take forward? And I think we do this in pockets, but we're not doing it at a whole system level. And the last one is really important for board members because it doesn't talk about system leaders, it talks about system stewards. And as a system steward, you would have responsibility for the health of the system. So it's a slightly different approach. It's taking a stewardship approach to the work rather than a leader in its more traditional sense. So just to give you a flavour of what Plymouth did, and it's taken quite a while, so none of this is very quick, but it does take a while. They had 70 organisations come together to look at substance misuse, mental health, homelessness, offending and domestic abuse, and have looked at a different way, a collective responsibility for developing services through this type of approach. And it comes down to sort of an element of safe and legal and empowering staff and those that know the needs better to actually crack on and get on with things and empower people and staff to do so. And it's based on the decisions that are best for people using the services, which we talk about, don't we? The NHS have talked about people-centred care for many, many, many years, and we have, you know, centred care and council services too, but it's actually putting that into practice. So you can just see the way that they have gone about that shared values, shared behaviours. It's all things that we've been talking about for a very long time, and I'm sure we all have aspirations to develop at a system level. And where Plymouth started, because actually we would be starting at the beginning, is commissioners from primary care, social care, public health and housing, and all services in scope, plus people using the services. And they also had services represented at different levels: managers, clinicians, practitioners, and service users with lived experience. And that's how they started to pull the work together. Claire, I was going to ask you just to update, because this approach was adopted with your Homes and Horizons work, and just to talk us through anything that was a challenge, things you learned, anything you'd like to share at this stage.
Okay, so people probably know about the Homes and Horizons project in Children's Services. If you don't, I'll give you a very brief overview. So it's basically a project that pulled together the need for therapeutic residential homes for the most complex children in our care, the understanding that those children would be better placed with foster carers if they could be, so working through how we would recruit foster carers who can manage that level of need, and also putting in place therapeutic education as a separate school, because we know that a lot of very complex children in care do not get access to schools. So what we did in terms of the human learning approach in this project is started with the children. So said, in terms of the real world, what is the issue? The issue are that we have some really complex children here who we need to understand better. So we started off by talking to those children who are the most complex and saying to them, so what is it that you think you need in terms of a care model? They came up with this care model. So that 3-part model there was their idea. They said that's what they needed. They wanted education, they wanted a home locally in Somerset, and they wanted access to some family time if at all possible. They shaped the commissioning, so we took a risk and went through competitive dialogue, which children led. And the children went to the people who actually, the organisations that actually put in bids to run this project. The children went, I think it was about 5 or 6 of them, to every single provider to their children's homes and spent a day in a children's home with each provider to say, did they think that the quality of care and the type of care they were able to provide was the right care for the complex children we have in Somerset. They also were involved in shaping the partnership by interviewing staff, doing community engagement sessions, and sitting on all, they now sit on all the engagement and decision-making boards. The learning element of this as well, in terms of what we learn from young people, is ongoing. So we learn from the young people in that project, and we shape the learning and training for staff based on what we're learning from the experiences and understanding of those young people, and also listening to the staff in terms of that other element of human learning. People working in that system are the people who know what they need and what training and how that should go forward. So in terms of the key issue for us in terms of this project, what young people said was one of the key principles was what they described as stickability, that they needed people who were going to stay with them, who would hold on to them throughout the difficult patches they're going through, and to make sure that we all understood that they needed that consistency of people in their lives. So young people have been really integrated into every single layer of the organisation, the way that organisation works with the Shore Trust, who are the provider we're now working with, to make sure that at the recruitment level, children are involved in those interviews, at the staff training level, children are involved in designing the training, as are the staff, and it's a fluid process. It feels a bit like quite a scary roller coaster ride sometimes, because actually we are not going with a standard process. We're having to shift with what children, young people and staff say they think they need, and follow their lead in that human learning approach, rather than saying this is what you normally do in a children's home setup and how you manage this sort of function. So if they say they need something different, we follow their lead and let them be autonomous and lead the process. It's working really well. We've got 12 young people in that project now. They had all had at least 3 or 4 moves in the previous year or 2 before they came into the project, and none of them have moved out permanently. So one had to go into welfare secure for a while, but is now back in the home. So we took her straight back when she came out of there. And another young person, unfortunately, ended up on a psychiatric ward, but he will come back if he's able to come out of that psychiatric ward. So we feel that we're confident that this is working, and that because we're following what children and young people and the staff working with them say they need, we're getting better outcomes for children, and it's a much more fluid. It is human learning. We're learning from the people involved in that complexity to develop the processes as we go forward. When we first started this, the Department for Education absolutely hated it and said, no, this doesn't follow any processes. We don't like it. It doesn't follow the system we need it to follow. And 18 months in now, since that first home opened and the school opened this September, the Department for Education cannot get enough of it. And I say, yeah, this is amazing. How did you do that? This, but in that single point, they fail to understand the whole concept of human learning theory, that it isn't a system that you can just write down and go, this is what you need to do, because every area, every child, every group of young people will have different needs, different approaches, different staffing requirements, and the model will have to flex if you keep using the human learning approach to the needs of that geography, to the needs of those children, to the needs of the staff in the individual situations.
Thank you, Claire. Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'll carry on. So one of the recommendations that's in the paper is that the board backs the recommendation to set up a small group who can start to think this through and think how we might start, how we might gather what's already working quite well and how we might take this work forward. On the advice from Plymouth is to start with quite a small defined project, not think that you're going to crack everything system wide at the beginning. So we can start to work that through. And I think between us around the table, there are some quite exciting things happening anyway that we could adopt this approach to if we wanted to. So that's our thinking of what we would need to do in order to start a small group. And if the board is happy, we can start to drive that forward and start to focus on some work we can do using this approach.
Thank you very much. Are there any comments or questions from colleagues? Jonathan.
Thank you, Bill. Is that working? I'm Jonathan Higman, Chief Executive of NHS Somerset Integrated Care Board. Just to say, Lou, thank you for the paper. And I mean, I think the workshop, for those of us that were involved in the workshop, absolutely kind of showed the importance of this and the opportunities. If we can get to a kind of real level of support for individuals that is tailored to individuals. So that's the first point. I guess the second point is I'm really supportive of something that looks at human factors, because I think quite often in these sort of scenarios we come up with a big old project plan and we have a load of things that we're going to do, but we don't actually address the issues around the way that people behave and the way that they work. So really supportive on that basis. I think for me there is just one thing about how we make sure we connect this together, because I guess the thing that's in my mind that I'm just a little worried about is that there are a number of approaches that are kind of bubbling up around how we do system sort of thinking, how we address human behaviours and human factors, and there is a bit of a risk that we end up on a dual track. So we have this work going on, certainly from an NHS perspective in the neighbourhoods work. We've started to try something through a programme called System Thinking. A number of us have been through some work when we started to set up kind of the ICB in the first place, around a system thinking approach. So there's just a bit of a danger that we end up with a twin track and a load of different things all trying to do the right thing in the right way for the right reason, but actually it becomes a bit complicated. So I'm just thinking, as I'm supportive of the recommendations, but I think there probably is just a bit of a step that says, how do we make sure that we keep this joined up and work out whether these things are complementary, because I think they might be complementary. But there's a bit of a danger that we then go out and start talking to people about it. They get terribly confused because, well, I was doing this system thinking work yesterday, and now I'm involved in this kind of other program which has got human learning systems in the centre of it, and I'm not quite sure how the two fit together. And I wonder whether there's a role as we develop the people board in this, just to kind of hold a ring on the. It's almost like part of the system organisational development work, so that we make sure that actually all of this is joined up and aligned. But I'm really supportive of the steps and supportive of starting in a small place, and actually the fact that we are looking at human behaviour and trying to tailor things to individuals is massively important.
Oh, sorry. Completely agree. I would definitely be linking with Jane Graham around all of that system thinking. I can see David online as well, and it certainly is part of AIM 6 within the outcomes and metrics work of the integrated. So I think there's a bit of a helicopter view at the start to sort of start to pull this together so that we can actually start to look at it. And I don't think we'd be wanting to change the work going forward. It's just ensuring it's adopting the principles behind this approach would be my suggestion.
For me, as much as anything, it's about the potential for confusion of practitioners. So when people are kind of getting into all of this and they go, well, how does that fit together? And I was doing this and I'm not quite sure it joins with that. And sometimes actually that confusion is kind of, there isn't really any confusion because they just run in twin tracks, and that's absolutely fine. But I think we just need to be ready we need to be ready for that. And actually, if we can join it up through some of the conversations with Jane, but actually let's do it. Let's also do it through the people board, because that could really hold all of this together.
Got Sarah and then Trudy.
Yes, thank you. I think Jonathan made a very good point there. What I took from listening to it, and as you know, I'm quite new to all this stuff, was that he said, don't pick a hot topic, pick something that's not absolutely, the worst thing that's happening to you at the moment, pick something that isn't. And I also thought he said, if somebody's got an idea and says, can I do this? And I don't know whether that's happening in our organisations. I hope it is, something like that. So I think if we could work through these principles in some way to do with a project like that, which isn't going to interfere with anything else that's going on. It's just going to be, I want to do this, or can we try it? Let's work through these principles. That might give everybody an idea of how it actually works in practice. That's my suggestion.
Trudy.
Yeah, thank you. I do totally take Jonathan's point. We've got lots and lots of different things going on. I think for me, one thing that I particularly like out of this model is that system steward role. And I think because as a board, we are potentially the board that needs to take a medium and longer term look at the outcomes that we achieve as public services for our residents of Somerset. And I think as an overall concept, that system steward concept would be a really good one for this board to adopt at a very, very high level. And I would like to propose that that we maybe once a year take a point in time to reflect as a system jointly whether we have been good system stewards for improving lives, improving health and well-being, and tackling inequalities across our system. And it needs to be an honest reflection. It needs to be a reflection which says, actually, we did this, this, and this. That probably went against our missions. And we did this and this and this. And actually, that probably went with our missions. But if this board doesn't hold that system steward role, nowhere else in this system is going to be doing it. So I would really like, if we do nothing else with this, and I really hope we do, because that was a fab example from Claire, but if we do nothing else with this, I would really like to see this board adopting that system steward role and actively booking in a reflection point for all of us once a year, an honest reflection about actually, are we progressing towards the metrics that David's going to come up to in a minute? Because those metrics are our long-term goal, but with such long-term aspirations for Somerset, we are going to need to all hold the faith. And the only way to all hold the faith is to make sure that we are reflecting as a board. It's this board's responsibility to hold that faith. So I would like to put that forward as a proposal, please, Chair, that once a year we reflect on how well we have been system stewards.
Okay, thank you. I'm looking at recommendation 3 and wondering whether we can add a sentence to the end of that with that to reflect that point. So it would read something like that this board take an annual view of its stewardship of the system. Is everyone happy with that amendment to the recommendation? Just looking around for any other comments or questions. It's a somewhat difficult one because I wasn't at the workshop, and there's a number of things here that remind me of action-centered learning, which I think is really, that we're almost having customer-focused learning sets in this, and I think that is something that's really powerful, and whether that ties in with some of the work around that. Duncan.
Thank you. And I wasn't at the workshop either, so I'm speaking a little bit in ignorance, but I think the point that was made earlier by Jonathan, a couple of people agreeing, I think Lou mentioned it, we just need to think about how we talk about this for everyone else. If we start using different words, meaning different things, different language, we are going to confuse people. And my limited understanding of human learning systems are that we're looking at that complexity. There are things that can be solved. We need to make sure we don't try and have one approach to everything when actually we don't need that approach. So I think it's really important we get the small group that Lou's described and take it forward. But I think we need to make sure we communicate quite widely within the system about what that group is, why it's different, and what that means. And I'd suggest for now we actually limit what we're talking about to very specific things where we say we're doing this, rather than we're talking about it being a generic approach, because that's when it'll totally throw people. And we've got quite a lot of confusion, I think, already in the system about what the approaches are we're taking from different parts of different organisations. So I think this is a really good conversation to think about, not just human learning systems, but actually how we're explaining to people in the system how we want them to do things in the future. If we can get a model, we can pilot something, people can see it and it can be demonstrated, then we can start to talk about how we roll this out into other places. But I think we just need to be a little bit careful about what we say as a result of this conversation to people in the future, because it'd be really easy to shorthand and say, oh yes, we're using this, and people start looking up online and going, okay, well, I'll do that as well then, which is not, I think, what we're saying right now.
I think to a certain extent that's covered in 1 and 2 as the recommendations, that we need that that multi-agency approach first of all, and then that clarity of definition, and to identify where there are opportunities and where there aren't opportunities as well. Okay. Not seeing anybody else wanting to contribute at this stage, so we're happy with the recommendation as amended by Professor Trudy's comments. Okay, happy to move on then. So we move on to our updates from our senior reporting officers, and we have Mel Lock on health and housing first.
Thanks. Where we are with housing at the moment is we have got Newton Europe working with us at the moment to doing a deep dive into housing as part of a free diagnostics. I have to make sure I keep playing that in everywhere. Looking at where we are in housing, what does housing look like? They've just sent me over their first report, which is really lucky that I've got that for this meeting, otherwise I was going to struggle a bit. But that first report really is doing some bottom-up work. So it's looking at some historic trends and the demands that we have out there. So what are the demands and what that's looking at? It's then having a look at temporary accommodation, analysing our temporary accommodation, our usage of it, how we're doing. And then most importantly, it's doing some case reviews. And it's doing case reviews with our staff to say, what was the possibility? What could we have done differently in this space for people? The outputs from those case reviews will then form, okay, so what can we do next? How can we change? How can we deliver differently? They're in that stage at the moment. What we'll then do is talk around, okay, so how do we do it differently for people that are currently homeless, people that are rough sleeping, and what is our model going forward? And again, we will be linking in with health. So this whole diagnostic should be finished for us, linking in with our public health data and others, should be finished with us by the middle of December, about the 6th week beginning the 16th, 17th of December. At that point, we will bring that back to yourselves with a bit of a plan, working a lot with Lou to actually say, okay, this is what we're going to do. This is what our recommendations are for you for the first few steps. It may be that we choose then to think through this system learning and say, actually, how can we do this? What can we do? And is there a small cohort of people that probably are stuck in our system a little bit, perhaps continue to pop into temporary accommodation, we support them, they have a dual diagnosis, and then they just keep going around the system. And is there a way in which we could have a look at a different way of working with people to do that? But we'll come back to you with that. So at the moment, what we know and what our demand is really telling us is that year on year, demand is growing. It's growing across the southwest, but it's absolutely growing here. And in the last year, the number of households supported in temporary accommodation has grown by about 63%. So it's a huge amount of people that are growing, and the types of accommodation they're growing into is an awful lot of B&B. We can see that over the last year's growth in bed and breakfast. So again, we've got to do this differently. We've got to think through what does that look like. It is also starting to pick up some of the health issues that sit alongside that, which is important to us. And what we also know is how do we do a better job at prevention, early intervention in this space. We're not quite there at the moment. We've gone to reactive support, not prevention, early intervention, and that's where we've got to get better at. So I will bring all of this back to you as we keep going and as we get the data into the right place, and we'll start thinking through, okay, so the next steps. The first step for me was pull the data in. Let's see what's going on for us in Somerset at the moment. We've also linked in with MHCLG to help us from their homeless teams and for their support. They're in with us now, working with us really closely, trying to say, okay, what does it look like today? This is what best practice and this is what good looks like. How do we get from where we are to best practice? We know as a Somerset, we are the 5th worst in the country in terms of rough sleeping and homelessness, and that is not somewhere we want to be. And that's obviously the date, that's last year's data because we haven't got this year's data in, but it's London boroughs, London boroughs, London boroughs, London boroughs, Somerset. Not a place that I want us to be in going forward. So we need to move that and change the way in which we do it. You will probably be aware the count's due any day. So there's one day a year where everybody goes and counts. It's not necessarily the same day, but we've tried to do it this year with Devon and with Wiltshire because people tend to move about a bit. So we'll have that count sorted. So the whole country over December do the count. And then that's where the homelessness data starts. So we'll have a look at our data following that. But it's not a place that we want it to be in. We shouldn't be, we need to have a look at this. And I'm really pleased that this is coming here. We'll pull all this together for you and bring a report back to you for the next meeting where we've got some more data and some more evidence and come back to you with, and this is how we're taking it forward. Okay.
Thank you for the report back. Are there any questions for Lou?
Thanks, Mel. And I think it does build on, if you remember the work MEME have done, Make Every Adult Matter, and the Better Futures work that the Homeless Reduction Board is doing. That is a really good piece of learning we could start our new approach with, is one of my suggestions that fits quite nicely into there. The health impact assessments is something else that's moving along quite nicely. So we're working with some of our housing colleagues to build health impact assessments into this agenda as well. So just to fill you in on the priorities that we focused on originally at the board.
Thanks, Mel. I'm just interested in the count and what kind of data is collected, and because that's an opportunity, isn't it?
The data is they go out. How many people are rough sleeping tonight? That's it. You go out and you find and you count people, and we do it all over all over Somerset that day. So we tend to know where people are. Are they in or are they out? Now, we were going to do it last week, but the weather was horrendous, so everybody was in anyway. So then you can't keep who's out. So we'll have to do it on a nice day as well. But that will happen, and the outreach team will do that. Our workers will do that as part of that process.
So one simple metric
that the government want you to count each year, and that gives you your stats across the country for how many people are homeless on that day.
The age or sex or
just tick.
Okay. Yeah.
But we will try and do a little bit more than that. So what we will do as part of that process is we will try and get age. So we've got a little spreadsheet. So we'll try and get age. Where are they? We will talk to people. We've not got that many. At any one time, there's probably, so during the last month, there were 100 people that were rough sleeping in Somerset, because we have to put that data in. That doesn't mean there were 100 people every day. Most likely 45, 50, 60 every day is the rough. Some are in, some are out. So you will actually have a conversation with them. We're not going to do that, but we'll record a little bit of data on them just to see how they are. We have put in there this year some health data. So how are you? What are your feet looking like? The basic stuff that your health team have asked us to put in as part of that process.
Thank you. And Lisa?
Yeah, and probably we can take the detail outside, but do we do that count in partnership?
We do. We work with yourselves in that space. So we do it, the outreach team do it. So it tends to be your local outreach service. So we don't do it in partnership with other areas. It's our outreach rough sleeper teams that do that, but they do link in with your teams that are out there on the beat as well as part of that process. So they'll know what night it is because they'll be out doing that with them. But it's our outreach team that do it, our outreach rough sleeper team.
Fab, thank you. Can we just have some details put in the sidebar or somewhere, just so that we've got times and the date, so that I can double check that, because I think there's a lot of prevention work we could do in that space and supporting work.
I'll come back to you, Lisa, privately with that. I'll give you an email and I'll link you in with Kirsty so that we've got that sorted.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Lisa. And Liz?
Sorry to have to ask this, Mel, but as I do so much work in Glastonbury, I have to ask the question, are you going to count people in vans and caravans? No.
No.
I know that those figures have gone up from November, from October, they've gone up quite a bit.
They're not roughly sleeping, they're not out on the streets, they're probably quite warm, maybe, in their homes. We do know, because we have a member of staff that supports those. We'll know where people are in cars. So we do where people are in cars and sleeping rough in cars, because that is a rough sleeping if they haven't got a proper home over their heads. But where they are in vans, there is a criteria that we follow. So no, not when in the vans, but when they're in cars, yes, because we have people rough sleeping in cars and in tents.
Okay, Steve and Rudy.
Thank you, Liz. Sorry if I missed this. Do we have any indications around children and whether there are concerns around children and homelessness?
I am sure there are concerns around children and homelessness. We know the age, and we do have people under 25 and under that are rough sleeping. We don't have we don't know at this moment in time, we don't think there's anybody under the age of 18 that's rough sleeping at this moment in time. I'm sure there's surface surfing. I'm sure there's lots of ways in which they're working, but no, we don't at this point. We do have quite good 16 plus temporary accommodation for people, so I know exactly where they are in that temporary accommodation. So no, I'm hoping we don't have lots of children under the age of 18 rough sleeping, but we do have an increasing number of 18 to 25s nationally and in Somerset.
And is that because we're quite good at spotting threats, risks that families may become homeless and children might be affected?
I'll let.
Hi, Steve. So for young people who are under 18, particularly the 16 to 18-year-olds, we are pretty good at identifying those young people. The project, the 16 to 18 to 25 project called Thrive 16 plus, provides temporary accommodation for young people 16 to 25. There is a law called the Southwark Law, which means that any young person who is 16 to 18 who says, I need somewhere to stay, has to come into care. So actually we bring them into care and place them in the Thrive 16 plus or similarly appropriate provision. We also in that Thrive 16 plus project have emergency beds. So if somebody is identified as out on the street or potentially going to be on the street that night, they will be given an emergency bed immediately. So we have enough beds to be able to do that on a regular basis. Occasionally, we do identify young people who are on the street at 16 and 17, very occasionally. But as soon as they're identified, we pick them up and bring them in to one of the emergency beds and then look after them longer term till they're 18.
Okay, thank you.
Kieran, Trudy.
Thanks, Mel. It's a pretty crude measure, isn't it? Let's be frank. It is a pretty crude measure, and I'd like to think that it's as a result of us being really good counters in this county. But I suspect that might not necessarily be the case, and it is a pretty sad indictment that we're London, Somerset, because our demographics do not stack up for that position whatsoever. I just think that perhaps there is a better way for us to measure it. It would be impacted by the time of year. It would be impacted by all sorts of things, wouldn't it? But what's important is that we compare ourselves with ourselves. It's really easy to compare with other areas, but the differences would compound the problem so much. So actually what we need to do is to make sure we compare our position now with our position maybe in 12 months time. And that would be a really good measure for this board to be looking at in 12 months time to see whether actually we've made a significant difference given the same type of counting, the same time of year, that kind of thing. it would be really fab also if there is a way that we could augment quite a crude measure so as we could get information about sofa surfing and things like that in it. Otherwise, we're not getting a true picture at all. But anyway, but it's good that we're on it. Fantastic that we're on it. I just think this board needs to consider comparing us now to us in 12 months' time, rather than with other parts of the country.
So I think it is a crude figure. It's just one figure. We do far much more. So I know every month how many people are, so that's why I can tell you there was 100 last month, any one time between 50 and 60 out on the streets. We know that. So, and that's because our outreach workers are out talking to people to try and find a different solution for them. So please don't think this is just the national data and we have to compare ourselves with the national data. That's just a once in a year thing that everybody does, and I'm not worrying about, well, I am worrying about it, but I'm not, because that's what happens. It's about how we support people differently. So we will pull that in, and I'm more than happy. We do have to look at the national data. Of course we do, to compare ourselves with like authorities, but actually it is important that we won't have this time next year that amount of people rough sleeping, but we understand what that looks like and how many that will be. So we will do that as part of this process. We'll get all of the data in the right place. We'll sort what our temporary accommodation looks like. And then what is move on accommodation, which is the next part that we need to do, is how do you do that differently? We need to be linking in with our drug and alcohol contracts and everything to wrap around people to make sure that we support them in the best way. But not a great place to start, but that means there's lots of improvement that we can make and a difference we can make.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think the key thing we need to be picking up is about no second night out. There are a number of people who are entrenched rough sleepers. Some people that's a choice. It might not be a choice we agree with, but actually that is a choice they're legally out to make. So it's difficult. The count is something we have to do by law. We have to do it the way we do it by law. No one says it's the best measure, but it's the one way government have got of actually saying at this point in time across the whole country what's going on, and it gives them some track. What we need to be really interested in is how do we stop people becoming entrenched rough sleepers? So we need to be really clear. There's a difference between rough sleeping, between homelessness. Quite a number of people who are rough sleeping aren't homeless. Yeah, they're choosing to be rough sleepers, but it doesn't mean they haven't got somewhere to go. So it is, going back to the human learning system point, it's a really complicated system, and there are lots of different inputs. One of the key things that the count helps us with is, as Mel says, understanding what we're looking like in terms of trend compared to everyone else, because this is about national impacts as well. But one of the measures we might want to look at as a local board is how many people are sleeping out for a second night, because what the evidence shows quite clearly is if people have to have a pattern of sleeping out and rough sleeping, they are likely to be in that for a long time. If we can catch people on their first night and make sure they don't have a second night because we've got somewhere to put them temporarily, we can get support to them, we can actually divert them from that pathway. So it is a really difficult system, and we need to not try and, I think, put a broad brush across it, as we were just saying in the previous item. But if we want to look at something for this board, actually understanding how many new people are coming into the system and how quickly we're getting them out of rough sleeping is really important. But we've absolutely got to understand rough sleeping and homelessness are different things. Yes, there's clearly a link. Yes, there are lots of people who are rough sleeping because they've lost their home. But entrenched rough sleeping is not just about homes eventually. To the stage where we know, even in Somerset, we've rehoused people, we've given them all support, and they're happy to be in the house during the day, and they go and sleep with their friends in tents or under bridges or wherever in the evening, because that's what they want to do. So we just have to be really careful, I think, about the data we talk about and how we talk about it.
Okay, not seeing anybody else. Mel, thank you very much for that report. And please extend our thanks to those staff that are doing the counts, because I'm sure that's not a straightforward or easy night out. Which moves us on to integrated health and care outcomes and metrics. I've got Heather or Duncan, and I'm conscious that Heather's not here, and I know that David is also presenting on this. Should we go to David first?
Yeah, okay.
David. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Chair, and apologies I'm not in the room today. The trains didn't look straightforward. Apologies for that. But yes, look, we sent a paper around which provided an update on the work for strategic outcomes and reporting measures. And the focus within that paper is just to draw attention to, because the board's been involved in the development of those earlier in the year, just to sort of provide an update on the progress made, but also draw attention to the development of the sort of strategic outcomes, sort of group 1 measures that are truly kind of generational, trying to work focusing in on healthy life expectancy, and that being the priority really in the mission of the work that we do moving forward. So within the sort of broad strategy to focus in on healthy life expectancy is the proposal within that outcome measures. The category 2 measures are also set out within the paper, and that is sort of sub-measures. So if we're developing a true outcome focus over a generation, it could be 10, 15 years, how do we sort of benchmark and milestone ourselves and understanding where we're going with that and the progress being made against it. So that sort of category 2 measures would be 12, 24-month measures to sort of let us know how we're progressing in the meantime. So the paper sort of outlines those. As I say, the main focus within it at the present is around board comment on that focusing on healthy life expectancy, because it's certainly a clear steer from central government within health at the minute around that area of trying to keep the population as healthy as they can for the duration of their life. And I know that's been picked up also in the public health arena, as you'd expect. So the next work on that is to sort of, if we are agreed that we can focus in on that, is to start to define what our ambition is. I'm trying to not use the word target, but where do we want to be in 10 and 15 years' time in terms of healthy life expectancy, and that gap that we've got within the population at the minute between those in the lower socioeconomic areas. So that's the sort of central focus behind the recommendation 1, is to progress that work on developing that stretch and that ambition, and hone in on where we want to be and over what time period. The second set of measures in recommendation 2 is really just an update of work in progress. There's a long list of measures there at present, and it's probably too long at the moment. So that will need some refinement as we go through Q4 this year, and as we go through the update to the JFP, because it's important that the sub measures that we've got are obviously quite tightly aligned to what our objectives are, not just within health, but within the partnership itself, and particularly within the council. We've had those conversations about how we bring that together during that January to March period next year. So those are the two baskets, if you like. There's challenges within. We don't, as Lucy will come on to talk about the platform, the data platform that she's leading the development on. Having that in place enables us to pull the information together and to report on these measures. So we've got that area joined up at the minute, but there's a dependency there in having that platform in place. And that, once we do have it, then that will provide the capability for us to pull the measures into a scorecard, and that would then report into and provide visibility for this board on how we're progressing against the delivery of the integrated care strategy itself. So those are that's the core of the paper that was sent round. Other areas have found it a real struggle, because what gets measured gets done generally. So it's really important that we get it right, and then therefore it's important that people contribute to that, but it's also important that it's aligned with the plans that we've got in place, and clearly at a partnership level, it's even more complicated than you would do at organisational level. So it is taking a little bit longer than we'd like. We've had a changeover in the team that are running this, and my thanks to those who've been involved so far. And we're just sort of making sure we've got capacity and resource to move it forward through this next stage to turn it into the scorecard. So that was the update I was proposing to run through, and I'm happy to take any further questions or any queries from anybody within the room.
Okay, thank you. And looking around the room, thank you for your update, David. I'm not seeing anyone who has got any questions or comments.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much, David.
No, thank you.
Which brings us on to item 9, which is system data and intelligence. And Lucy.
Lucy's had to take a call. She's
Okay.
not back from what she needed to do.
Yeah, I looked across to where she was, and she.
She will be back. I don't know if we're slightly ahead of schedule, but she will be back.
Now, but only about 6 minutes ahead. Claire and Jonathan, would be all right to move on to the integrated neighbourhood working now, and then we'll take Lucy's item when she's turned. Jonathan and
we haven't prepared this. Well, we've prepared the slides, but we haven't. We're doing a double output, so we'll. I think Claire's gonna make a start, and then I'm gonna talk specifically about some of the work that's been going on.
I'm sure everybody's aware that the work around prevention and early help has been quite complex and quite difficult to pull together. I think it's fair to say we're still in the early stages of trying to pull that together across the system and trying to come up with a bit of a sort of strategic framework and some key actions that we think we might be able to deliver over the next 12 months to pull the system into one place around what prevention and early help means and how we could actually make that happen effectively in our communities. I think it's quite interesting looking at this update in the light of the human learning systems work, that this work actually fits really closely with the human learning systems. It's all about learning from our communities, understanding what our communities want, how we support them to make the changes that are needed in those communities and act as stewards or facilitators to help that happen rather than controlling the dialogue and the work that is going to happen going forwards. So as we've said here, it's really, we recognise it has to focus on relationships. This is all about relationships, how we interact with people, how we interact with communities, making sure that we do understand what's happened to them and how we work with each other better. So we're not doing to people or doing to communities, we're understanding their needs and responding. We have agreed, I think, that the overall aim of this is about improving the healthy years lived by people in Somerset from birth right up to the point of health inequalities becoming really evident. And in trying to do that, working with people to build both their individual resilience and their community's resilience to be able to live that healthy life in their own home. We do recognise that we can't be too prescriptive about this, again, in relation to human learning systems, that this is about local autonomy in some places, responding to what people say. There'll be some things that happen across the system, but some things will be very specific to individual geographic communities, but also communities of people that might have similar interests or similar needs who may not be in the same geography. That said, obviously it's very complicated. I don't think we've solved it, but we're sort of on that journey of trying to resolve it and trying to help you understand where we've got to. So if we go to the next slide. Okay, there's also a recognition that we need to include more partners in this. I've had a brief conversation with Lisa in a meeting about the joint targeted area inspection, and the police are looking to do some work in relation to their neighbourhood teams and reworking those and thinking about what they could look like. So it's absolutely critical that they bring the police into this prevention early help work so that we're all doing the same thing together effectively in terms of working out how we work together going forward around communities and early help. I won't go through any of those bits. I think Jonathan will cover some of those in his section. So if we move to the next slide. We did agree some principles for this work in terms of overarching principles. And interestingly, again, human learning systems, where the top one is the one that we felt we had needed to add in. We have expanded some of the others, but that really person-centred approach, that it's very proactive, it needs to be incredibly flexible, to make sure that we intervene early, but understanding people's needs in the context of their community and understanding what is important to them, so that we actually get this right in terms of what communities need and want in the longer term. We'll move to the next slide. So this is a very basic model that we started to put together to try and help us understand the whole system at a very high level. So basically, this is about understanding the difference between prevention and early help. Slightly nervous saying this sitting next to Trudy. So we understand that prevention is the longer term outcomes, the longer term impacts, and what we do to prevent those longer term impacts on health. And early help is a much shorter term in terms of intervention in the here and now to prevent people escalating into statutory services. In terms of how those things overlap, this diagram tries to set out what we think we need to do, which is making sure that we actually build evidence for what we're going to do in terms of prevention and early help, using data and making sure that it's informed by research and analysis. We obviously have the new public health intelligence team who will be able to be the sort of engine room of that, but we also need to make sure that we're pulling live data from across the county in all the different organisations, the voluntary sector and communities, to inform that picture. A really important aspect of that is hearing community voice, so that we're actually pulling together. I know that team has started pulling together all the different places where we do hear community voice and individual voice to inform that data and intelligence. But that's absolutely critical. We can't say we're going to support communities to be individually and groups resilient if we're not hearing what they're saying about what that looks like for them. So that's absolutely essential. That's obviously quite a big piece of work, and is going to need to be an ongoing Forth Road Bridge piece of work to make sure that we're constantly reviewing what is it that are the priorities of the communities, what are people saying about that, what are they saying about the progress that's been made, are there any changes in terms of demography or national policy that is starting to impact on what is happening in communities and what needs to happen. And we think in terms of what we need to do, and that middle sort of pale green bit is largely about the LCNs currently, is about how we use those LCNs to start to coordinate systems around people, to make sure that we have the right people in those pieces of work supporting communities, and those groups are starting to help the system change to enable communities to be able to be resilient and to be able to lead their own change, really, in their own journey towards something different for their community. And then the orange sort of circle and the overlap there is that in order to make that change, LCNs are a group of people. We need some people who are change enablers effectively. So some bits of the system at a high level, who is going to enable that change that we identify through research needs to be made in those communities. How are we going to do that? Who are the people who are going to engage with those communities to help them make those changes that we've identified with them probably needs to be made? And then the final bit of that journey is those individual and cohort interventions. So there will be community change, but there will also be individuals, there will be cohorts of people in communities who need specific interventions, specific to their needs, that might be within their community, but are very specific to individual people or cohorts of people in that community at a particular point, that might not be related to the overall change, but needs intervention to prevent those people and groups of people getting to statutory interventions in adults and children's services, particularly. Not that I'm self-interested. I think Jonathan is going to do the next two. Is that right?
I think that's the plan.
Yeah.
I think that's the plan. Thank you, Claire. So yeah, I mean, just reiterating the point that this is really complex work, and I think we've taken an approach where I think one of the previous slides referenced it, taking a twin track approach to this. So we're absolutely recognising that there's work around the development of LCNs being led by Somerset Council, and there is now, I think, an increasing agenda from an NHS perspective around the development of neighbourhood working, and from an NHS perspective, that's sort of neighbourhood working built around primary care networks. So we could get ourselves very, very confused and very focused on geographies. And I think we've tried to step above that and use the approach that Claire has set out as the kind of framework for this. We also adopted the principles that were on one of the previous slides. And those principles were the principles that underpinned the memorandum of understanding that we developed and built with colleagues in the voluntary sector, and it's kind of underpinning that work. So what we've done is, and I think the other thing to say is within Somerset, we've got some examples of some like amazing practice, some areas where this is working. We've kind of, we've heard from Claire about the work that's going on around children's services in Somerset. We focus from an NHS perspective on a lot of the work, for example, that's going on in Frome, the partnership there between the general practice, the town council and the voluntary sector, and the development of social prescribing and the community engagement in Frome. We've got examples and pockets of work going on in South Somerset around complex care management, supporting general practice, supporting those people who are the most vulnerable to get the care that they need. We've got work in Minehead, looking at, again, the integration of health and care services in Minehead with the real community voice in there, learning from the experience of local people and trying to shape service. The same going on in Shepton Mallet, but the point is, it's not consistent. And we need to find a way of being able to support and engage with communities to spread that that good practice across the whole of the county. So what we did is we had a design group, a group of people who we sort of found from across the system who were doing work in this sort of space, but it wasn't joined together. So some of those people who had experience of developing those sort of models within their geographies, people who were passionate about the use of digital and data within this, voluntary sector colleagues as well. Now it's not. I think we included a lot of people, but we didn't include everybody because we needed to start somewhere. And I think part of the point is that we need to sort of build this out. What that group came up with is two things. So one is the trellis framework here, because I think what we were saying is what we need to do through this work is to find a way of being able to empower and enable local communities to grow kind of and flourish in the way that they see best, because the starting point is very often quite different. The pattern of available services, interactions, relationships are different in different geographies. So we need a way of being able to support the plants to grow, but at the same time we need to put some structure around it and support it. We also recognised through that design group that what we needed to do was to probably start off with a patient cohort or a population cohort that is consistent. Because again, when you look at the models that we've got in Somerset, they are often focusing on different groups and different parts of the population. And in order to identify system impact, we need to have a go at doing this at scale across the county. So the group came up with this framework. In essence, there's two elements of it. There's still work to do on it, particularly on defining some of the inputs and at some of the points at which the stakes cross here, because those are, I think, are really important points. But effectively, what we're saying is here is a set of things that we're going to provide local communities to enable them to do the right thing and to develop the right arrangements in their own geographies. So the key outcomes are, and a lot of them link back to what we talked about through the human factors and a human learning presentation earlier. But it's about how do we enable people to have holistic, preventative and proactive care that meets their needs and is built around them as an individual. It's about how do we have strong relationships between all of those people working across multiple agencies to support those individuals. How do we have a real focus on health inequality? So not just do have one size that fits all across our county, but enable local interpretation and local focus on the things that are important to local populations. And how do we support through this a strengthening of the voluntary sector across the county? And then we recognise that there were a set of enablers. So having really good digital systems that predict. There are AI tools that are out there that we're starting to use now they're kind of predictive tools really around the most vulnerable people and who are going to be people who might be in need of statutory service and other services of more support into the future. So that data is out there. Lucy's going to talk about our journey around population data. So actually we can provide those geographies and those people with some clear data around what it is that's going on within their communities and in their geographies to support that decision making. We need to focus on leadership, and that kind of comes back, I think, to the point. It's almost the point I was making earlier about. So we've heard about the human learning approach today. I was a bit concerned about this system thinking approach, because that is happening already in some geographies here. So we just need to make sure that we join this together. So when that offer is supporting people in neighbourhoods, it's consistent and people don't get confused. But we need to provide the right kind of the right support for people there. We need to find a way of being able to learn and share, because I think quite often where we've got really good practice in the county, actually it's because people are kind of heads down and they're not able to have the time or the space to be able to share the really good work that they're doing. But also this work is going on across the country. So we shouldn't think that we need to solve all these problems and that we've got all the solutions right here in Somerset. And I think critically, the financial framework that enables this and the governance framework that enables people, and some of that we got into this morning in the presentation, but we shouldn't have an overbearing governance. This is about enabling people to do the right thing individuals, and we also need to support that through a shift in resource. So a shift in resource away from where we're spending the large majority of our money at the moment, supporting people when they get ill, to enabling them to stay well in local communities. So the team came up with that framework. There's some further work to do to define exactly what the offer is in each one of those, particularly around the enablers, and also to start to think about like, the junctions of those. What is the activity that takes place there? We just move on to the next slide. The second thing is that in terms of that population impact, the proposal is that we do this and we start off by looking at it through the lens of frailty. And frailty can mean quite a lot of things to different people. I think from an NHS perspective, we kind of it's a term that we sort of bandy about, and it actually within the NHS it still means different things to different people. And I think if you were thinking about it, you probably would have in your mind a frail older person. That's not necessarily what this is about. I mean, in my mind, I think about this as people who are living with multiple long-term conditions, who have, and they may well be older people within our community, but it's not exclusively older people in the community. So linking this to that population of people who are living with multiple long-term conditions, who have, it talks about it on the slide, actually, frailty is a condition. I mean, Bernie will have a view on that, but I'm not sure whether that's the case or not. But I think it is about people living with multiple long-term conditions. So we start with that group of the population. That's not where we finish, but we need to start somewhere, and we need to be consistent across our geographies, so that we have a consistent population impact, so that we can start to see impact at system level. So in a way, that's where the top down and the bottom up kind of meet each other, and you've got some really early thinking there about what does that mean in terms of what we're trying to support people to do, what might the inputs be, and what are we looking in terms of the outputs that would support that. So we'd implement that framework, but with a focus on frailty and complex comorbidity as our focus. I think I'll hand it back to you.
Come back to me. Okay. And I think Jonathan's slides are really helpful in that we obviously need some sort of framework to work this through in terms of these proposals. So looking at that trellis framework in terms of shared outcomes and the enablers felt like a reasonable way of trying to sort of measure and understand what we were trying to achieve, but across a wider piece of work. Okay, so the final slide there is the implementation proposal. So what we are suggesting or proposing that we would like the board to consider, and these are very high level proposals, is that we sign up to the trellis framework that Jonathan's just described as the governance framework. So we've got those key enablers and the key outcomes that we're all working together, because we think that's broad enough to be able to encompass all the work we do around prevention and early help as those projects develop. And I have put some of the sort of council projects through that. So like Connect Somerset works quite well with that model. We've had a look at it all. So I think that does work for everybody if you're willing to sign up to that. The key first piece of work is building that Somerset Place data set, so that we know what the key issues are for the whole county geographically as a place, in terms of the emotional and physical health in communities. So we understand what that looks like across the county, and also the differences in different communities and different places in the area. And once we have that a sensible set of data, and we need to put some timescales to this, we can analyse that data so that we understand what are the opportunities in communities, where are the deficits in communities, where are communities doing well, where are communities struggling, and how do we work that through. And then integrating that with what we know is working well locally, as I've just said, in terms of opportunities, and thinking what happens outside Somerset, where things are working in locality and neighbourhoods, what works well there, how can we use that to inform what we might need to do in some of our localities and some of our areas, and also learn from our own trials and pilots. So learning from the frailties and communities work, learning from LCNs, learning from Connect Somerset, learning from other places. And then finally sharing that analysis, which I think is the trickiest bit, to be honest, is sharing that analysis with communities to say to our communities, okay, this is our analysis by looking across the system about what we think the areas of concern are in Somerset, where we probably need to do some work to help you live healthier lives from birth to being older. And this is what we think is the right thing to do. What do you think? how would you respond to this as communities across the county? And what then agreeing with those communities where we start effectively, what are the priorities now, and how do we move those forward? And then we need to implement that plan. So what we would like to do, we think, is at the next, we're aiming for the implementation in terms of that conversation with communities being at the next annual parishes conference, because we think that is a place where a lot of communities will be present in terms of people in those communities, having done a lot of that analysis, sharing with other people in the community before we get there, to be able to say, right, okay, having done that analysis, we're talking to you about this now, and can we in that conference agree these are the key priorities going forward across the county, so that we at least have the key themes. And then from that, we'll be able to, we hope, say, right, these are the key themes. So where is the work that's already happening under those themes? Are they in the right geographies for the places that we need to do the work with? Do we need to move some of that work into different places? Do we need to reshape some of that work to meet the priorities that we've identified, so that we've actually got some evidence that we are doing things to support those communities to be resilient and working well? And that we feel would be a model that would help the whole system, health, the local authority, the voluntary sector, communities themselves, to pull together against priorities that hopefully we will be able to agree, because they will be hopefully very obvious what those priorities are from the data that we are able to accumulate. It's a very optimistic view, I feel, but you know.
Okay, thank you very much, Jonathan and Claire, and go to Julie first.
Thank you. I'm going to premise this by saying that I think the neighbourhoods work is brilliant, and it really, really needs, we need to push on with it rapidly. And we need to really crack this nut, because it's been going on for quite a long time now, and we really do need to start to come together on it. So I'm a huge supporter of the neighbourhoods work. I'm now going to go on to a little bit of a ramble. I'll try not to make it too long, Chair, but I do want to get it out, and this is the best place to say it. So I understand totally the reason why we would look at frailty first. And we need to be clear as to why we are looking at frailty first. Part of the reason we want to look at frailty first is because there is a potential opportunity for us to absolutely improve lives for people who are really struggling, but also there is a potential for us to release resource that's been tied up in the system at the moment through work on frailty, which could then be used for other priorities to prevent ill health. So that's our premise over long term. So I absolutely see that premise. So that I want to go past that first chunk of work, and I want to start to think about the second chunk of work. So the second chunk of work, in my eyes, needs to absolutely refer back to the improvement and the tackling inequalities in healthy life expectancy. So the frailty work does that to some degree, but not to the degree that we could achieve through other types of issues that we might tackle. I want to just, if I ask nothing of this board again, I want to ask you to read the Office of Budget Responsibility report in July last year. So the Office of Budget Responsibility report in July last year shows that during the pandemic, the working age economic inactivity of this country, not the county, but I'm sure if we looked at the county, we'd get the same, of this country rose by 1.5 percentage points. So 21.7% of people in 2022 were out of work, economically inactive, and that's against a backdrop of other G7 countries actually reducing that point during the pandemic. So we went up, everywhere else went down. And ill health is cited as a reason, as the main reason for that increase, and is cited as the main reason why people are currently economically inactive yet of working age. So at the moment, we've got 2.6 million people who are working age in this country. That's 6.1% of the workforce who are outside of the workforce for health reasons. And we're in this position because our health and well-being of our population in this country was of poorer status going into the pandemic than other G7 countries. And unless we turn this around and really start to look at how we improve health and well-being and support people back into work and reduce the number of people going out of work in the first place, the OBR have been really clear in that report that this is the kind of thing that will see massive fiscal pressures on this country that we will not be able to turn around from. So it's really worth a read. I've given you a short synopsis, but absolutely everybody should be reading that. So absolutely agree that frailty is the first one, and I understand the reasons totally and I'm fully behind those reasons. The second one for me the second priority needs to be people who experience multiple disadvantage, and particularly those who are at risk of being out of work for ill health reasons or are already out of work for ill health reasons. And I think using the neighbourhood approach to tackle that actually could be a really, really good way forward. So I'm fully supportive of the work. Absolutely, it needs to be looking at inequalities. But actually, for me, I just want to advocate the next priority really needs to start to look at how we get people back into work or prevent people from going off from work in the first place, which will then also support children and young people in our county. So I'm sorry, it's a ramble.
Thank you, Trudy. Now, I wonder whether it's possible to put a link to that OBR report in the chat, because I'm really fascinated to do some follow-up reading on that. Claire, I noticed your microphone's on. I wonder to pop it off. Thank you very much. Any other comments in addition to that, Alan?
Thank you, Chair. Just to kind of follow Trudy's, although I'll do so badly, is I think linking to this and linking to the point around the buy-in and engagement with communities, we know that place-based activities are going to be critical to this. So I'm quite sure when we have these conversations at a neighbourhood level, there'll be a number of issues that will be raised about access to services, public transport, easily accessibility of the road network, all those sorts of things that we often found and have found through LCNs. And I wonder whether there's an opportunity to kind of look at this neighbourhood work now in relation to some of those things that will start to enable communities to engage. So we know that from local community networks over the last 18 months that that's one of the key things that gets raised. If we look at member postbags, for example, that's the sort of things that get raised. So the ability to link those two things together, I think is going to be quite critical for the success of this. And I think, yeah, I agree with Trudy, it's an excellent piece of work, but it will require that engagement of what it feels like to live locally to make it really work and be mobilised quickly.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you for this. I think it said in the first slide, it's a sort of two tracks coming together. I think you can still see that in some ways. I've got to say I'm struggling a little bit in that I can understand the concepts, or maybe I can't, who knows. I think I can understand the concepts and why we're building in this way, but I think I need to see a little bit more detail about what it actually means. Yeah, so where we say sign up to a trellis concept, I can sign up to that, but I'm not sure I actually understand what this is going to mean on the ground. I'm trying to translate this back to not what community might hear, but what actually people are employing are going to hear. What does this actually mean we're going to do differently than we were doing yesterday or the day before? And I'm just struggling to make that link right now, I'm afraid. So I think, you know, the thinking, I can absolutely, with direction travel, I can see how we're bringing this together. And, you know, obviously we're all very committed to locality working. But I think for me, I just need to see a little bit more of this being worked through. So I'd be very happy to say, yes, keep going. Very happy to take the last slide, say, yes, let's sign up to that as a concept, build the data sets. But I think I want to understand, okay, so when we've done that, what is it we're actually talking about? Because I need to see where the link is between what's effectively a statutory intervention, to go to the slide with the 3 circles on, you know, versus early help. Yeah, prevention seems to be sat in a bubble that says strategic. And you're going, okay, well, I can live with prevention strategic, but it's also practical as well. And what I'm not quite getting my head around is, how do we think this is delivered on the ground? Because a large concept, if you look at different models, things like asset-based community development, talks about actually how much communities do for themselves, which we never ever see. And that's already baked into the system. So the data we see already assumes communities do what they do already that stops people being lonely or needing support earlier or whatever it might be. And what I'm not quite getting is how are we handling that? And what we're talking about being on top of that we do? Are we talking about getting communities to do more for themselves? And I think we're talking about all of those things, but I can't quite see the join. And it's complicated, and it's supposed to be complicated. So I think I'm very happy with direction of travel and really grateful the work's been put in, because I think it's been really blinking complicated to get this far. But I just think what we need to do is take that next step, say, yes, let's go with this as we're developing it. But what I'd really like to see is coming back, not soon, but relatively soon in that sense, and just understand what this actually means in a practical sense. Because as organisational leaders, someone at some point is going to say to us, I don't get it, what does it mean? And if we can't actually explain that in a way that someone can understand what it means for their job, what they do differently, how we have to redesign services, how we have to redeploy people, whatever it might mean, we're going to struggle. So I think it's probably in the thinking, and obviously this is just a set of slides, not everything people have been thinking, but it just needs to come out a bit more for me at some point.
So I think it's not going to be straightforward, as you say, and it is going to be really fluid. And I think that will be a challenge because, we're big monolithic organisations and we don't really do fluid very well and sort of adaptation and changing to circumstances. So it's going to require a much more agile approach. But we have to start somewhere, I think is where we got to. That if we don't start with, okay, let's see what the data tells us, because that's our evidence for what actually needs to change. We got nowhere really to start. We could just pick a priority, but it might not be the right priority. And it needs to be a matrix of priorities in different places across the county. So I think what we're asking for is to say, let's start with looking at our data. Let's work out what our data tells us the issues are in communities, so that we can actually then start to think with communities about, well, this is what the data tells us. And I think that will deal with some of that issue that Alan raises about highways and potholes, because actually that data won't look at that. It'll look at people. It'll look at what are the issues for people, what are the issues for people's physical and mental health and emotional health, and being able to feed that back to communities, which, as I say, I think is the massive hurdle we've got to get over in terms of how do we talk to communities about what that data says, and then being able to say to them, right, okay, so getting to a point where we agree with them about these are the key issues that we need to resolve. And yes, if we do it properly, it will then be really tricky because we've got all these people doing all these jobs, some of which won't be impacted, some of which will be impacted. But we need to see it as a system. It's about a human system. So it's about all the organisations of the county being able to say, come behind, these are the priorities for the system. And how are we going to be more agile as organisations and work across boundaries and across systems to be able to support communities to be different, to do what they need to do. And it's not about the organisations that the statutory organisations leading, it's about that facilitation, that stewardship. And it's a really different way of working, and we're going to have to learn as we go, because actually most human learning system stuff is not, as Lou said in the Plymouth example, is not big system. It's usually small project to start with, because actually it's really difficult to think about. But if we're going to be ambitious, and I think we all want to be ambitious for our communities, then I think it's worth a try. And as we've said, the first iteration of it is the data, trying to work out what that means, and then the next stage is talking to communities about that data and actually what we then need to do about it. And I agree, at that point we're going to have to think long and hard about, if we talk to communities about this and they agree these things, how would that actually work? Because we don't want to talk to communities and then go, sorry, we can't do that. So it is complicated, but we have to start somewhere. And for me, it feels like, I think Jonathan agrees, we collect the data, we think about it, and then we work out what the next stage is on the basis of what that data starts to tell us.
I think Jonathan just beat Duncan.
Sorry, I was just building on Claire's points, really. I think this is complex, and I think we all come to it with a slightly different perspective on where to start with all of this, which has been one of the things we've been trying to work through here. And I think what we've been doing is how do we chunk it up into bits that actually means that we can make some progress. So in my mind, there is the whole piece about asset-based community development, which is massively important and complex, and the job of this board working across partners to deliver. There is also an element about how do we just organise statutory service in a way that is better placed to provide earlier help and support to the most vulnerable people in geographies. And the trellis work was developed to support the latter. It can build out to do and to be part of the wider work as well. But effectively what we were doing here was to say, if we took a cohort of the population, how do we organise ourselves in a way that enables us to provide better, more proactive, earlier support for people in those geographies? Because if we do that, then actually the theory goes that we can start to be able to avoid people needing to go to hospital as much. We can avoid them needing to use some of the high-end statutory services, and we can unlock resource. So how do we do that? We do that by creating a trellis like this that supports those teams to work in those geographies. And very much the work here is, how do you create those teams? Who are part of those teams? And what tools do you give them to enable them to do their job? So some of it is about the data around the people that they can have the biggest impact on. Some of it is actually about some of the historic behaviour around, well, actually, we've worked in silos in those geographies, and we're all kind of tribes, all trying to do the same thing, but actually what if we work together? And how do we provide some support to really pull some of that out? And then there's an element which is just how do we, within a set of guide rails, enable people to, have some lots of money and some resource to just do the right thing for the people that they've identified. So that's kind of what we're trying to develop through the trellis. The note on the side says that we need to work this up in a bit more detail. So you put your point, Duncan, about actually this is all quite high level and what does it actually mean on the ground? I think the next phase is to take each one of those things and say, well, what does that actually mean in terms of what support would be provided? But I think there is an ongoing challenge here around how do we, things are coming together, but there are a number of tracks that are running together. One is about how do you deliver statutory service at a local geography level? And then there's the whole thing about asset community development. How do we support communities to take more responsibility for themselves? How do we build voluntary sector partnerships within all of that? It's really complicated, and to try and do it all at once, I think we would quite quickly come up against a set of buffers. But what we're doing here is to just try and chunk it down and then bring it all back together again. So I completely agree. Next phase is to put some more, to define some of this in a bit more detail.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And I think it is a really complicated area. So I think I agree with what Claire and Jonathan said. I think the key thing for me will be to say, can we work out how we take the trellis framework and the 3 circles and actually make that one coherent diagram, which is really difficult. Claire and I have been talking about it already, and I know that's hard. The other thing, I just wonder if it might help, picking up particularly Claire's point about it being very different for people on the ground, both communities and for workers. The model we have right now very much with communities is that they expect us to turn up and do something and go away again. And this is not what we're talking about. So maybe it would help if we did a bit of storytelling. If we actually tried to write a few narratives that said, okay, so it's 20 years in, it's 10 years in, whatever the timeline is, we got this right. So therefore, how this looks in our communities is like this. We got this right. Therefore, what that means our colleagues are doing is these sorts of things. Because if we can't imagine that, if we're expecting the data to tell us that, we're really going to struggle to translate it for communities and for people in the system. If we can maybe have a think about, in an ideal world, assuming everything worked perfectly, what would that actually mean a district nurse was doing, a social worker was doing at that time? That might just help us think, because if you got that as an endpoint, you can then go back to the concepts and say, okay, so do those concepts take us there? Do we want them to or not? I just think we might need to do something about a bit of future gazing in terms of telling a few stories and see if that gives us a bit more insight that helps them work back through exactly the things you're both talking that we still need to do. Because I think this is a really good piece of work and it's really complicated. Let's not, be uncertain about that. This is really difficult stuff. If we get it right, it'll make a massive difference. If we don't get it right, we're going to waste a number of years and potentially put things back for people as well. So, we just need to put all the energy in to make sure we get the right outcomes as soon as we can.
Okay, hello. I'm really quite shocked about what Trudy said about the percentage of people that were not in employment. I mean, I hadn't realised that it was quite as high in Somerset. One of the issues, and I'm speaking from Health Watch here, is you've got a culture change that you need to bring about. And that is not something that anybody has got the power to do. It's going to be a time thing, because we have various areas, and I know families who actually are fourth generation unemployed, and they get sufficient money off the state and through the black economy to fund the lifestyle that they wish to live. So that's, as far as I can see, is going to be one of your biggest buckets. And I'd be grateful to hear your comments, Judy.
Yeah, and so that was national data, not Somerset data. So that's the first thing. And the Somerset data we still need to work through. We've got good understand. We've got some understanding as to some of the reasons why people are of working age but not working. And quite a bit of it is relating to mental health problems, musculoskeletal problems as the two big ones. So actually, whilst I agree with you, I think there is an element of some cultural shifts that we might need to have as a country. There are also things that we could do to understand why people are not in active employment, but also to make sure that where people do want to work and are able to work, that we support their improvements in their health and well-being sufficiently well so they can work and support their families. So I think it's not going to be we'll fix all of the problem, but actually we do, where the problem exists and people, I mean, it's much like the homelessness and rough sleeping issue that we talked about earlier. Actually, where people are able to get back into the workforce, or we prevent them from not being in the workforce, actually we should make sure that as a system we are supporting that as much as we possibly can. It's not going to be a quick fix. Absolutely agree with you, but there is work that we need to do, as does every part of the country.
Thank you, and thank you for sharing the link. I'm finding it a very distracting read at the moment. I'm trying to focus on sharing the meeting rather than reading a document. It's incredibly interesting. Am I seeing any more comments on that, Liz?
When we talk about the difficulties of this, I think the thing that's come over for me most in my years as a councillor is how different each small community is, and how something that's a really good approach in one place will fail just a few miles away. And I find that quite hard to get my head around, how we can have an approach for Somerset without acknowledging those differences between communities. So I'm not saying we can change anything. I just think it's really important that we acknowledge that, and that we acknowledge that people generally find the ways to work best in their own community. And there are without a doubt some brilliant people about, and it's extraordinary how the people in a community find out and know who best to go to for anything. And so capturing how that local knowledge is both found and used to its best experience, I think, is probably one of the most important things to do. I've just seen something on an agenda for a trustees meeting, where I'm a trustee of a community centre in Street, and we're looking to fund somebody who can help people do online applications. And I'm like, my hand's in the air already. Yes, let's do it. Because if there's any one thing that's going to matter in the years ahead, I think, bearing in mind what we're doing at Somerset Council, that's going to be really important. So then I don't want to, as a trustee, put my hand in the air, say, yes, let's do it. Where can we find money from our own funds and from other funds to do it, without that learning then being spread. How it's spread, I don't mind. It doesn't matter, as long as it is out there for other people to learn from and adapt for their own community, because that's the difference. In Street, you can do something that could be seen as patriarchal, because we've got the old factory thinking still there from Clark's. You could move that 2 miles across the Brue to Glastonbury and it wouldn't work. But then where we've got the development of the health and wellbeing hub, there'll be a different way to work there and different people who are brilliant. So those kind of case studies, I think they're going to be really important. Thanks.
Thanks. And yeah, I think there's wise words about that cookie cutter approach, that we can't replicate exactly what we can see, but we can inspire through example in different communities and bring that leadership forwards. I'm also very aware that the social capital, the leadership that brings forwards innovation and change in a community is better represented in some communities than others, particularly those of lower social mobility struggle to find that social capital to be able to bring together people in organisations and to bring to get funding into them, and that's where that support model is needed. So yeah, all very good points. Thank you. I'm not seeing anyone else commenting. I wanted to comment on that feedback from the SRO. So thank you, Claire and Jonathan. And if we move back to system data and intelligence, and Lucy.
Thank you, and apologies for not being in here when my agenda item came up. I was called out for a fairly urgent meeting, so I do apologise. Probably should introduce myself first so that everybody knows who I am. If I haven't met you before, I do apologise, and I will endeavour to make sure that I do in the very near future. My name is Lucy Laker. I am the Chief Data Officer for Somerset ICS, and it is a joint funded post. So it is a post that supports not only the council, but also NHS Somerset in its wider sense, and primary care and the voluntary sector. So it is a very much joint position for the system, and one that I am very honoured to have taken on. So thank you for having me. Let me share my screen and I will go through where we've got to. So I was appointed back in August, and since then have been fairly busy with a small team trying to move things along. At the end of September, we took a proposed approach for a digital and data strategy to the ICB board, and within the time that I had there, I asked essentially for a couple of things. The first was the approval to progress with a 90-day activity to assess what the system looked like in terms of technology, but also digital and data capability, and indeed the governance that surrounds some of those capabilities as well. So that is underway. We're very close to sort of coming to an end of that piece of work, but also to assess and understand two critical missions that fall out of that digital and data and technology strategy. The first is about working together, which very much aligns with everything that we've talked about here. How do we break down those technological barriers that prevent us essentially from working collectively as a team? And we really should be working as a team. We should have technology that works across the ICS so that we can share knowledge and data effectively. And the second one was essentially going into the detail of what an improving lives platform looked like. So what does a data platform look like for the ICS, and how do we support the creation of something that would allow us to get the right information in the right place for the individuals that would use it? Final thing was really about, as I mentioned, that governance and the transparency piece, being absolutely critical about who's making the decisions around who accesses this data, but also if there's an issue with any of the data sort of delivery, how does that get escalated across the system? It's an absolutely critical thing for us to be able to manage risk when we're putting all of this information together. But also looking at the adoption of common standards that will help us from a technology standpoint bring those data sets together. So can we, as a system, agree to a common set of technological standards that would allow the data to flow across all our different systems that we use? whether that's within the council or Somerset Foundation Trust, or indeed ICB corporate. We've also committed to working in the open, and this is really a critical thing and hopefully a positive thing for the system. I'm a big believer in being very transparent about the activities that we're undertaking, particularly when it comes to individuals' data, whether that's resident data or patient data. And so we have made a commitment to publishing the strategy, but also publishing the roadmap and the approaches that we are going to take, so that our population within Somerset can access that information and understand how we're taking steps to do so in a very ethical way in terms of bringing that data set together. So, as I mentioned, progress, most of the audit work has been complete. So we're now collating that into a wiki that will be shared across the system. So it will be accessible by everybody in the system, and it will detail all of the component parts that we've learned over the past 90 days. So it will include things like technical architecture. It will include things like the interoperability of systems, so we can understand whether we can extract data from them. But it will also look at the capabilities that exist across the system and how we might bring together these communities of practice that might be able to support that knowledge sharing and the activity across the digital data and technology sort of professions. We had approved the discovery phase business case for the Improving Lives data platform. I'll go into that in a little bit more detail on the next slide. We've also released the Somerset-wide ICS data sharing framework agreement, and that is absolutely critical from an IG perspective to allow us all to share data across the system so that we can actually pull it all together into one data platform. We're doing the final checks on content prior to that commitment to publishing all of this information so that we can push it out to the wider community, and our community can understand what we're doing in regards to digital and data across Somerset. And last but not least, we're beginning to recruit for an ICS digital data and technology team, which I'm really hoping will be made up of people from every different part of the system, and is not just going to be a single team sitting within a corporate entity. So it is very much a cross-partnership approach. So very briefly then, just in terms of the Improving Lives data platform and the discovery phase, there was a business case when I joined that was circulated across the system that did a really good piece of work on putting together some potential options for what a population health platform might look like. I think one of the things that I was keen to do was try and understand a little bit more of the complexity that exists across the system. It's very easy, I suppose, to be able to go and talk to suppliers out there and for them to say that they would solve all our woes. But unfortunately, as we all know, there's a lot more complexity that lurks beneath the surface, hence my rather cheesy, apologies, picture on the slide. But it's really important that we do understand that complexity and can understand the risks that we're taking on as a system as we start to try and pull these data sets together. So over a 10-week period, and it really will be a 10-week period, we will be conducting technical tests around data extraction and matching. We'll be assessing the market for solutions provided that will be aligned to our architectural standards that we're pushing forward. We're going to build an intelligence community across the ICS, a community of practice essentially of who's going to use the outputs of a system that we might pull together, and what do those outputs look like, and are there common sets of reports that we could do once rather than perhaps do 3 or 4 times as it might be the case right now. We're also going to test the capabilities of our new IG framework as an ICS. I think that's really critical to test it in anger. And we're going to create our first multidisciplinary cohort insights team as well. So in the first instance, that will be around frailty to align with the work that the neighbourhoods teams are doing, but very much with the ambition to continue to move that work forward and start to focus on other areas. Trudy has obviously mentioned the out of work population, and also potentially looking at sort of the transition work between children's and adults for individuals that have additional needs. And finally, we want to engage with our residents and get feedback on the proposed approach to population health as well. So I know that Somerset is a particularly, should we say, cynical population in terms of data usage and their, what should I say, the nervousness that comes with people bringing together data sets essentially for nefarious purposes. We want to absolutely reassure the population that that is not the case in this regard, and that we will take every ethical step that we can to make sure that it is not the large American corporates that will be owning and processing their data sets, that we as a system will take that risk and that responsibility as we move forward. So very much an approach that we want to kind of reassure and take the population with us as we move forward. And finally, just one thing, and I do apologise for this, the size of the writing on the screen here, but as we went through the audit approach, the 90 days, what became apparent is that there's also a very real need across the system to help people navigate the support that's out there within the system as well. So whether that's residents, whether that's patients, or indeed whether that's staff members, finding the right information within a few minutes is something that everybody seems to want to be able to do. And so one of the final missions that we've added here, and again, we'll need to go through to business case, but essentially is looking at how do we navigate that support offer across the system. Doesn't matter where it comes from, but how do we give people the right information at the right time in the simplest and most usable way so that they can get the services and the help and support that they need. So those are the 3 missions that the team will be working on and that we are committed to over the next 2 years.
Okay, thank you very much. Lucy, any comments or questions, please? Liz.
Lucy, any problems with getting the signatures?
For the IG framework, I think what we are going to, there are lots of complications, not least the collective action that's currently underway by GP practices across Somerset. We are going to work where we have the signature. So hopefully all the partners around this table will be signing that framework, and we can move forward with the critical systems that exist within our organisations. But where the GPs are willing, we will work with them. And as we start to showcase more benefits from this approach, we're hoping the other GPs to come on board. But we're not going to wait for all of the GP practices to sign that framework to progress work. I think that's really critical. Otherwise, we could be waiting a very long time.
There's kind of a follow-up to that one, which is what do we do with those that are reluctant or sceptical?
Well, we will be continuing to work with them, and hopefully by working in the open, they'll realise that we are taking a very ethical and robust approach to pulling data sets together. I think the majority of those practices that might push back are just worried about the unknown, worried about what might happen as data controllers if they lost their information or that patient data. And I think it's just about providing that reassurance and that robustness to the process to allow them to sort of get that confidence.
Thank you. Okay, I'm not seeing any other comments or questions either online or in the room. Lucy, thank you so much for a very thorough presentation and welcome. Okay, which brings us on to items of any other business, I believe. Lou.
Thank you. I've got a few any other business, and the first one I wanted to just share with you some fantastic news. Our very own Trudy Grant has won an award on Friday. It's the Association of Directors of Public Health Chief Medical Officers, so it's the 4 Chief Medical Officers of the whole country, National Impact Award. So it's a pinnacle of a public health award, and it's for the impact she's had in her role to date. So well done, Trudy. I just thought it was great to recognise you here at the board.
Well done, Trudy, and thoroughly well deserved. Thank you.
Okay, the other one is to say that Chris is now taking on the officer lead for the Somerset board. So this is my last one technically as the officer in charge. I will still be involved. I will be a public health advisor to the board, so still making sure we keep that health inequalities, health and well-being approach to it. But I just wanted to take a moment to reinforce how we have dealt with the mandated functions of the Health and Wellbeing Board, just to remind people. So in terms of the Better Care Fund, we delegated that to David. I think he's still online. And we've delegated that to the Joint Commissioning Board. The SEND agenda, we've kind of delegated to Claire and the work through the Children and Families Board. And the idea with those areas is if there are areas of escalation that need to come back to the board, then this is the way to do it. So it's kind of those sticky bits. Anything that's sticky that needs a system level leaders conversation, that's how it comes back to the board. There are other areas, Bill, where you as chair would have oversight of things like the adult safeguarding report. So it's just a reminder and just a way that we want it captured in the minutes that we are maintaining those statutory functions and working through how we report them. For the ICP, it's about the integrated health and care strategy and the outcomes and frameworks, which again, we've got on the agenda today. It's just, I wanted just to remind us that we do have mandated functions that we need to assure that we're all aware how they work and how we have delegated them out to some of the other strategic boards and partnerships that we've got.
Okay, thank you, Lou. And
Oh, and I've got one more.
oh.
before I finish, I'm going to go out on a flurry. We also need to get better at a forward plan. So Chris and I will be working quite closely together, a forward plan both for these public meetings and a forward plan for the workshops. We don't have a topic for the next workshop at the moment, so would welcome any ideas or suggestions that as a board you would like to have a discussion or a development session on in private, and also then how we start to bring forward agenda items. We've already talked about an update of housing, we've talked about updates. How do we build those updates in as well as keeping the strategic conversations going?
Thank you, Luke. First of all, thank you for everything you've done with the Somerset board, and welcome, Chris, and look forward to working with you going forwards. In terms of the forward plan, I'm really fascinated by the point that Trudy made earlier about economic inactivity amongst working age people. I wonder whether that would be a good topic for a workshop to engage with. Duncan?
I think it would be a good topic. I just wonder if it'd be worthwhile maybe adding in what we're doing around skills as part of that conversation, because part of the issue, as Trudy's rightly saying, is about economic inactivity right now. But one of the issues we also face is about structural change in employment types. How do we make sure we still got the right skills in the workforce in Somerset so that people can engage in jobs of the future, high paid jobs, etc. That might turn out to be two different workshops over a period, but it might be the same one depending how we want to look at it. So.
Indeed, and it fits in some of the work that the Somerset Growth Board is also doing as well. So it could be an interesting crossover in that area as well. Okay, not seeing any further suggestions, but suggest that we take the forward plan offline and look at other things that we can take forward. Okay. I believe that's the end of our scheduled business. Just checking there's nothing else anybody else wants to raise while we're still here. Not seeing anyone indicating. Thank you so much, everyone, for your attendance. Having said it would be 3 hours, I've got it just under the 2. So clearly giving extra time means that I finish on time. I'll enjoy the extra hour, and thank you very much, and see you at our next meeting, which is on the 11th of March, again here at the JMR in Taunton. Thank you so much. Okay, that may be the next date. Thank you very much.